Good morning or good afternoon, depending where you are. Welcome everyone to the next session of Meet the Members of Empower Africa. Excited and honored podcast. My name is Shai Bernstein. I'm VP of Business Development and Partnerships in Empower Africa. And we're going to have one of these podcasts every Monday at 5 p.m. CAT, which is Central African Time, also known as GMT plus 2, also known as IDT and many other names, especially with these few weeks where the clocks are changing, it's a bit tricky. Before I present our distinguished guest, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, Empower Africa is a business community with a mission to drive investment, trade, and job creation in Africa. We believe in trade over aid, and that business is the best way to build things and make a difference. Empower Africa has three verticals. The first is the Empower Africa Business Network. The second are events and trade missions. We're now working a lot on virtual networking events. Highly recommended to check it out. Not just a webinar, but actual content and the ability to actual network, and consulting and project facilitation. We believe in bringing good people together and the power of synergy. And our business community is an invite-only paid membership. We want to make sure that we have good people, straight people who can add tremendous value to each other. Our goals really are to create connections, optimize communication, and maximize collaboration between different stakeholders driving business in Africa. And in the business community, you could find SMEs, banks, PEs, VCs, government officials, and so on. Speaking of bringing great people together, we are honored to have today Dr. Ian Ralby. Ian Ralby, we've met, 2 years now? I think the first time we met was in Sierra Leone.
Coming up on 3 years.
3 years. Wow.
3 years ago, yeah.
Wow.
2018. Yeah.
So in addition to the fact that he has a Ph.D. From Cambridge, right?
Yes, exactly.
The idea, we have a lot of private jokes there that we won't go into now. And Ian is really one of those people. The original Cambridge, right? But I really wanted to say, I'm going to say something now, Ian, that, don't be embarrassed by it, okay? It's something that I want to say to all our, viewers and listeners who are joining us. But it's something that it may be the first time I'm saying it to you in person. So Ian is one of those people who, whether it's on a Zoom call, face to face, in a business meeting or with a drink in your hand, you could just ask Ian a question about extremely, wide spectrum of issues and topics, and he will just give you the full lowdown, just so versatile with his knowledge and his experience, and we're going to hear more about that in a minute. And Ian, you should just know, I love you, man, but I appreciate so much your knowledge and experience, and honestly and genuinely enjoy listening to you share your experience and your thoughts on so many different things, maritime, energy, agriculture, so many different things that we've discussed, and there's many more that I know that you deal with, whether it's papers that you're publishing and so on. So without further ado, please tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, that's an incredibly kind introduction, and I'm delighted that we met originally in Africa, and I've enjoyed watching as Empower has adapted and shown the agility and ability to take advantage of these difficult and strange times by creating virtual opportunities to continue its mission and connect people, because I have attended a lot of different events, but none have had that same level of actual interaction as the Empower networking events, because you really can meet people for the first time and interact with them, even though you're in a virtual space. So huge credit and congratulations to you on keeping things going amid this bizarre global context. So as you've said, I mean, I look at it and deal with a lot of different issues. My background is actually as a lawyer, maritime lawyer. I then transitioned away from being specifically a lawyer into focusing on law and security and the intersection between the two. And so for the last 10 years, I.R. Consilium has been working with governments, international organizations, different companies, different foundations, different NGOs, different bodies of all sorts all around the world on the nexus between security, governance, and development. And that's sort of our sweet spot of space. We are, in some ways, connective tissue between the public and the private and the non-state sector writ large. So not just industry, but also civil society organizations and others who contribute to the wider context in which we're all working. And my own focus is largely on maritime security, but we also focus a lot on resource security. So we deal with everything from oil and fuel theft, which we've done extensive reporting on for the Atlantic Council, to gold flows, which we're working on for the likes of the OECD and the National Science Foundation, to fisheries work, which I've published a lot on recently. But I often joke that my work is in fighting pirates, traffickers, smugglers, and thieves. And that really does sum up a good chunk of what I end up doing. But
Right.
in terms of our work, it's really that attempt to make sure that, particularly in Africa, Africa's been a major focus of my career, not the only, but probably the most significant geographic area of interest. That we are creating the safe, secure, stable maritime domain in order to allow for life on land to flourish and for the blue economy, the inclusive, sustainable, and environmentally responsible economic activities in the maritime domain to really thrive. I think the last few weeks have been very indicative of just how close our land-based lives are connected to the maritime space. We saw it with the Suez, that a single ship, just one vessel in distress, could disrupt global supply chains, the global economy, could change fuel prices, food prices, could delay goods from getting to where they need to go. And we often repeat the mantra that, no shipping, no shopping. And that's true no matter whether you're on the coast or in a landlocked state. But actually seeing that come to fruition before our eyes was I think quite helpful for making that case that despite our life being on land, our world depends on the water. And so in addition to working on these security and development issues, we also look at the interconnectedness of what's happening at sea and how that affects the economy on land and our world. Yeah.
And on that note, before you continue, because I, again, take the blame for being fairly ignorant in terms of the capacity and real, the numbers of how much of the goods around the world globally is shipped by the ocean. I remember that I think it was actually probably with you, 3 years ago, where I started hearing more about maritime and about shipping, and for some reason I just didn't. I thought that in 2019, 2020, and so on, still most of the things would be done by air and moved by air, and the fact that so much of, can you share some numbers?
Yeah, sure. I mean,
how much actually on the ocean, it's crazy. And you're right, the Suez Canal now, that story, I mean, that really just showed it,
exactly. And it's hard to believe, it's hard to fathom that 90% of trade by volume moves by sea. But go to a landlocked area,
90%.
90%, 90 plus. And in fact, during the pandemic, it's actually been more because air travel has largely been suspended, but the maritime space has kept moving. And, if you look at, what moves by sea versus by air, yes, value may be higher in some of the air cargoes because they need to get places faster. So like, for example, gold and other high precious, high value minerals will move by air often because the price may have changed by the time a ship would get there. But for the most part, the goods that we use, from our clothes to our food to the technology, the everyday equipment is moving on a boat. In fact, I wonder how many of us have experienced goods, have used in our day-to-day lives goods that have traveled on that specific ship that was stuck in the Suez. Everything from coffee filters and toilet paper to stuff we use every single day.
IKEA.
What's that?
Right. IKEA,
Exactly,
or
exactly. No end of frustration comes from what we can do by book. But I think the other important factor is that we forget that, or we often don't know that this interaction and almost everything we've been able to do in 2020 during the pandemic through this virtual world is thanks to a very small number of submarine cables. Our life on land in a virtual world is dependent on maritime infrastructure. 97 to 99% of telephonic and internet communication that moves internationally goes via submarine cables. That is a huge volume. $10 trillion of economic activity move every day in submarine
that's that.
cables.
Hold on, let me just for to make sure that everyone who's with us understand that 97% of the
Hmm.
communication, telecommunication, internet that we use around the world is through subsea cable.
Yep,
Unbelievable.
it's
And
incredible,
and
and we're talking about.
and we were
I mean,
talking about the vulnerability of it. Sorry,
exactly, and
we were talking about the vulnerability. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, vulnerability is even more striking when you realize that there are only about 400 of them, 420 at the moment, privately owned submarine cables that connect this entire world. So if you look along the Red Sea coast, for example, the bunching of cables that are there connect large parts of the world and account for 1/3 of the internet globally. You cut through that group of cables and you've lost a third of our connectivity. That means everything from hospital records to banking systems to hotel bookings to logistics systems are all
Oh my
offline.
God.
And perhaps the scariest thing is that they're basically the size of a garden hose. They're a really tiny bit of infrastructure. And so our work at our Consilium is largely to help make sure people A, understand some of the reliance on the maritime domain, but B, that we make sure that we are protecting it both with laws and with physical protection, so that we minimize the vulnerability, because vulnerability is not always a security threat. If you look at the history of submarine cables, a lot of the worst outages have occurred just from a subsea landslide. If you look at
Right.
what happened with the Suez, we don't know for sure if there was any interference, but a sandstorm basically threw off the global economy. So a gust of wind is all it takes to upend our way of life. So we work really hard to make sure government entities, be they navies, coast guards, marine police forces, or ministries of foreign affairs, maritime administrations, etc., and the private sector. So the cable, not just owners, but those who lay the cables, those who maintain the cables, those who move the ships, the shipping lines, the freight forwarders, the traders, all of the different actors in both the public and private sectors who need to be paying attention to the maritime space are doing it in concert with each other. So we're always looking for new ways to close some of those gaps and minimize the opportunities for either natural disasters or criminals to get in the way of them. In the maritime world is this notion of the blue economy. We talk about the green economy on land. We talk about green business, green energy, but those same concepts of sustainability, renewability, and inclusiveness are being transposed into the maritime space. And no part of the world has had a bigger role in helping highlight the blue economic opportunities than Africa. Whether it's Seychelles or other countries like Mauritius, Liberia, Kenya, a lot of the principal thinking around how to attract investors, attract companies, attract innovation to the maritime space, so that we can maximize the value of the maritime domain, are actually occurring in Africa, and that's part of what our Consilium is working to try to harness, is to collect some of the great ideas, the great insights, the great innovations that are moving into the maritime domain, and help find ways to pair those new ideas with the government actors who can help incorporate them and make them happen. Because ultimately,
Right.
our own take on security is that we are not trying to secure the maritime space or help others secure the maritime space against threats. That's an unending and very expensive proposition. The point is to secure the maritime domain
I'm
for
having some
the enrichment
technical.
of the state and the betterment of life on land. And so we are constantly looking for how to harness the innovation and energy that is going into these blue economic ideas and initiatives. So yeah, we're excited because in some of the Empower Africa events so far, we've had the
Right.
chance to talk to both government and private sector actors who are beginning to think along these lines. And how do we find and highlight and amplify, particularly African innovation that is moving in this way. If you go to a place like Billionaires Bay in the lagoon of Abidjan, you could just visibly see some of the young African entrepreneurs finding opportunities to
Wow.
leverage physical geography and leverage national goods, be it cocoa beans and processing them in new ways, or local fisheries and processing them in new ways, coming up with great new recipes and other things. And so we are seeing particularly the youth of Africa, which is the future, being at the forefront, not just within Africa, but globally, of coming up with innovative entrepreneurial ideas. And at the same time, some of the African governments coming up with some of the most sophisticated, large-scale financing
Right.
schemes. So if you look at Seychelles, they did a great job with what's called the Debt for Dolphin scheme, where they swapped their sovereign debt in exchange for creating marine protected areas. So they have essentially locked in a sustainable maritime domain in perpetuity, and in the process paid off their sovereign debt, which is a fantastic way of leveraging the marine resources for the enrichment of the state and the betterment of life on land. But equally, everything from traceability of fish and branding of high quality goods, to interesting coastal tourism opportunities, to more innovative technologies in the maritime space that can process what would otherwise be waste, be it organic waste or man-made waste, and turn it into something useful on land, be it energy or be it goods. We are seeing some really excellent innovation, and that's what we are hoping to help foster and appreciate Empower Africa's role in highlighting that. We are working to create opportunities for engagement between private sector and government actors, particularly the navies and coast guards of the region. And we're looking to involve as many as we can in really a dialogue to sensitize each other to each other's needs, and really help advance mutual interests. So we will be launching fairly soon a series of dialogues, and would love to make sure Empower Africa is part of that dialogue and involved in it. And we look forward to partnering with our own friends at Agora Nexus to help launch a dialogue series on maritime security and development in the Gulf of Guinea. And so we'll
100%.
be doing a lot in that space. What's that?
100%. So I wanted to ask you, you've mentioned the governments, and I'm very interested in thinking and understanding, because you said at the beginning, we want to raise the awareness of how it's like a garden hose, and to take the submarine cables as an example. But at the end of the day, it's not so much about, John Doe and Mrs. Smith across the street, right? To not to care about this, everybody should care about it, but the actual um, responsibility, perhaps. I believe there may be some sort of a gap here, right? Because at the end of the day, it's governments who are in charge of it or responsible for it, but then they're private companies, right?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, this is where it gets a bit tricky because, how much does everybody need to know about the maritime domain if they can't physically do much about
Right.
it? And that's partly why we've kind of ignored it. Generally, we don't pay much attention to the maritime space. However, the more we understand it, the more we can find small ways of putting value into it. And part of where that really comes into play is political will. If politicians feel like their constituents don't care about maritime matters, be it submarine cables or shipping or fisheries or coastal tourism or even just not having a polluted beach because they don't care about where the plastic waste goes, if there isn't that sort of drive to build political will, you're not going to get there. No matter how much capacity, capability,
Right.
law you have, you aren't going to be able to actually have that safe, secure, stable maritime domain because those who are in positions of authority and power just don't value it. And so there is this sort of dynamic tension where, okay, yes, the population physically cannot, go and protect submarine cables,
Right.
but they can put pressure on their politicians to make sure that there is a national submarine
100%.
cable resilience plan, that they do have contracts with people. So, for example, in January 2019 in Tonga, and I don't want to pick on Tonga, but it's a fantastic real world example.
Right.
Island state in the Pacific, just a everyday maritime accident. I think a anchor was dragged over the submarine cable, and it severed their one and only submarine cable. The president's remark was that it wasn't like being back in the 90s; it was like being back in the 1890s,
Wow. Wow.
because there was no connectivity of any kind. They had no phone.
Right.
So the only way they could communicate with the rest of the world was via a satellite phone that was privately held because the government had not ensured that they had a contract for satellite backup in order to have resilience. And there was no backup in terms of redundancy of
Wow.
cables. And
Wow.
so that kind of awareness is where, particularly today, where we rely so much on the internet, you can build the political will. But the same is true for the shipping. I mean, look at how many people have taken an interest in maritime domain matters after the Suez.
Exactly.
Look what happened with Beirut. The Beirut blast in August of last year, that was a maritime matter from 2013. That was a vessel that had been defaulted on. The owners defaulted and abandoned the crew and the vessel with its cargo of ammonium nitrate in the port of Beirut in 2013. The crew didn't get off the vessel until 2014. The cargo came off sometime between 2014 and 2015 and was put in a warehouse. The vessel sank and it's still in Beirut harbor in 2018. And then, lo and behold, August 4th last year, we see one of the most horrible blasts that has, destroyed tens of thousands of buildings, harmed so many lives,
Wow.
and really created more than $15 billion of damage. And that's, again, one vessel. So, the more will and awareness we have towards actually getting these issues dealt with, the less problematic they become in the long run.
Wow. 100%. It's kind of like maritime is the unspoken of enough um like base, right? And foundation of everything that we're doing, right?
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah, and if you look at Africa in particular, relies much more heavily on it than some even realize. If you look at some of the West African countries in particular, the amount of reliance on fish as the protein source in diets is huge. We're talking 90%, 90% of your dietary protein coming from fish in some of those states, and that is among the highest in the world. So anything that pollutes the environment, overfishes, illegally fishes, or damages the opportunity for fishermen to have a sustainable and continuous catch,
Right.
you're looking at a food security issue quite immediately.
100%.
Because if that is how your way of life is dependent, it's very fragile again.
Yeah, and why don't we dive into that for a minute, the fishery aspect, because we've also had
Mm.
multiple conversations about that. So we know that there are multiple countries today in the world that are being, I don't know what the word is, robbed, by different, I don't know if we call them
Other countries.
other countries, but
Yeah.
specifically those pirates and thieves that you mentioned, right? Um, where does that stand today? How much are you involved in that space? Is there a
Mm.
solution at hand? And maybe you want
Yeah.
maybe you want to just give like a quick recap for those who don't know, right? But just
Yeah. There are sort of two sides to that. On the piracy side, the Gulf of Guinea has seen the largest surge in kidnap for ransom anywhere in the world over the last 2 years. In fact, in 2020, there were roughly 135 seafarers abducted at sea. 130 of them occurred in the Gulf of Guinea. So 95% of kidnaps on the water are occurring in West and Central Africa at the moment.
Wow.
That is significant, partly because not all of those were from, tankers, which was the traditional means, or even cargo ships of other sorts. It was also from fishing vessels. And so that's where we see sort of a nexus between piracy and fisheries on that front. In terms of the fishing space, though, there are at least three different major concerns in addition to the victimhood
Right.
of being attacked by pirates. One is illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. And this is a rampant problem that estimates put on as much as $23 billion a year worth of lost fish from illegal activity.
Wow.
This is a really big challenge, in particular in Africa, because a lot of other states have taken advantage of a lack of maritime domain awareness and a lack of legal infrastructure, as well as the ability to enforce that legal infrastructure in order to harness and harvest the abundant marine resources that exist in the waters off the coast. Africa accounts for one of the largest fisheries in the world, just in the Gulf of Guinea, equally large in the Indian Ocean. And those who understand the value of that fishery the most are criminals.
Right.
Some of those criminals are tied to other states, but some of them are just plain criminals. And there's a lot of illegal activity that is diminishing the fish stocks and causing a pretty acute situation for artisanal and local and small scale fishermen who are doing their fishing legally. The other issue is, or the other two issues are fisheries crime, which is the use of the fishing sector for other criminal activities. And we have seen a major increase in drug trafficking, even by boat during the pandemic. As we said, air travel has been largely suspended, and so other goods like variety of illicit goods that would have moved by air are now moving by sea. So rather than shipping synthetics and opioids and some of the more nefarious new drugs and new psychotropic substances, we are seeing them move by boat. Mauritius has, for example, seen a major spike in synthetics.
Wow.
Mozambique has seen a huge increase in the movement of heroin and synthetics alike. And these sort of dynamics on the East Coast are equally problematic and nefarious on the West Coast. In 2019, I think Cabo Verde deserved huge credit for interdicting 9 tons of cocaine. Huge amounts of drug interdictions. But Cote d'Ivoire has had a few large busts. Other countries are seeing larger and larger quantities moving in the maritime space, using fishing vessels as part of the conveyance for how those drugs are transiting Africa. And
Wow.
now that there's a burgeoning middle class, not just transiting, also arriving in for sale in West and Central Africa
Right.
in particular. So we have to pay attention to the fisheries crime aspect. And finally, something I just published on recently, state protected illicit fishing is another sort of emerging concept where foreign states are using their own diplomatic and military law enforcement and other infrastructure in order to protect their own fleets engaging in illicit fishing. And we see this a lot
Right.
in Africa. And it's not just some of the most notorious illegal fishers. It's some of those who are most vocal about transparency and credibility as well. So we really have to watch out for the extent of the exploitation of the African maritime domain.
Wow. And by the way, on that note, because you mentioned the bunch of countries just now, I remember this being a fun fact, or better yet, an incredible fact. Would you care to share how many countries you've visited in, roughly?
Well, I've worked in more than 80.
More than
So yeah,
80.
yep,
You visited in more than 80
yes,
countries.
yes,
That's
correct.
incredible.
It would be much more if we hadn't had the
You
pandemic.
didn't have the pandemic. I know, I know. You're actually one of the first people that I thought of, and I remember we chatted back then, but because I have a bunch of friends and colleagues and people I know that really are on the road a lot, but but you really take it to the next level. It's fantastic. It's incredible. 80 countries. So,
Yeah.
I mean, what would you share some highlights, Like I don't know, two of your most favorite countries to visit or to work in?
Well, I like going places that other people perhaps don't think of, and finding the beauty and the amazing inspiration that comes from some of the more under appreciated places. So, I'll give you one just as an example of just magic that is completely unknown, and that's Sao Tome and Principe in West Africa. It's an archipelagic state. In the Gulf of Guinea, and absolutely magnificent. Some of the most unique geography and landscape I've ever seen. Incredibly just beautiful, wonderful people, amazing food. Best fish I've ever had in my life.
Whoa, hey, let's write this down because this
Unbelievable.
is coming from a man who's been to over 80 countries.
Yes.
Wow.
Sao Tome and Principe, I adore. But there are gems all over. So I had the fantastic opportunity last March before everything shut down to spend some time in West Africa. I was in a number of different countries, and I had a great time visiting friends in the Navy of Cote d'Ivoire, and we've spent a lot of time going around on different trips. The lagoon. But I had no idea until that last trip that in the strip of land between the ocean and the lagoon, where Abidjan, the capital, is located, there's actually a freshwater lake called Lac Bacre, and it's magnificent. It is absolutely pristine. There's almost nothing on it, and we were able to have unbelievably good fresh lobster and go for a swim and canoe on
But
Lac
how does that
Bacre. And
work?
it's those sorts of gems.
It's a
What's that?
freshwater lake near at the
Mhm.
coast.
Right between the coast and the lagoon. So there's a strip of land. If you look at the map, there's a strip of land right along the coast.
But how does that happen
And
from an aquifer perspective? Like, how does that?
I am not a scientist, but these
Wow,
are the kinds of questions I don't bother asking because I just enjoy. So it's just a beautiful place, and
fantastic.
it's that kind of majestic, untapped gems that I
Right.
enjoy finding with some of the most amazing people. So thanks to my good friend Captain Charles Bamele of the Ivorian Coast, the Ivorian Navy for taking me.
Fantastic.
So that's the kind of thing that is worth traveling for. You just can't get that virtually.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Now tell me, what else in terms of other, are there any interesting projects you're working on now? Anything, you'd be looking at for perspective in terms of, business collaborations with somebody from the Empower Africa business
Yeah.
community?
So one of the things that I work on with a number of different states is what we call an integrated maritime domain strategy, where you have three different pillars. You have the security side, which is sort of the stuff I work on all the time. You then have the governance side, which I work on all the time. And then you have a third pillar, which is the economic development side. And that's where there's so much scope for new input and new insight. And so we are in the process of starting a couple of those in different countries. One thing that is fun to watch is we talk about the notion of sea blindness. That as we've been saying, a lot of the world is just blind to the contribution of the maritime space to our lives. So we are sea blind as a human species, and that means that we don't pay it enough attention and don't appreciate its value enough. Ironically, thanks to piracy, a lot of states in Africa have somewhat overcome their sea blindness.
Right.
They've started to realize, okay, the maritime space has some value. This no shipping, no shopping thing. We probably need to make sure the shipping is able to keep
Right.
moving. But understanding the extent of the value is a far off proposition, and
Right.
so that's where we work on what I have termed maritime wealth blindness. And the way I explain maritime wealth blindness is if I handed you a bucket of gold and I said, you can't weigh it, you can't look up the price, go sell it and get the best price you can for it. And you came back to me and said, I got $100,000 for that bucket of gold. I can say, wow, it's a lot of money, but it was worth $1 million. Your ignorance about the value of what you just had means you just sold it 90% short.
Wow.
And that is happening all the time. I often point to an example in in the country where we met, in West Africa, we know well, where a marine biologist from the US called a diving school and said, hey, can you go down and look and see if you have these little worms that I think might be perfect
Crazy
for your
story.
particular environment? Yeah. And they went and they found them, came back, called the marine biologist, said, yeah, we got them. He said, great, thanks so much, appreciate it. That was the end of it. But a broker from another country saw that this had just happened or heard about it and went to them and said, look, I'll give you $1 for every one of those little worms you can pull up off the seafloor. So they start harvesting hundreds of them.
Is it sea
And
cucumber?
only
Sea
sea
cucumber?
cucumbers, exactly, sea cucumbers. And it turns out they are sea cucumbers whose raw economic value on the marketplace was between $140 and $250 each. So, 100,000 to $1 million for that bucket of gold is nothing compared to $1 versus $250 for hundreds of sea cucumbers. And that sort of wealth blindness when it comes to the raw value is one part of the problem. The other part of the problem is probably best exemplified by a different bucket. So this time I hand you a bucket of clay and I say, same thing, can't weigh it, can't look up the price, go sell it, get the best price you can. You come back and say, got $100. I can say, wow, that's amazing. It was only worth 50. But don't you have friends who are artists, who are sculptors, who are potters? Couldn't they have turned that bucket of clay into bowls and plates and artwork that sells for hundreds or thousands of dollars? You could have taken that raw material and enhanced its value 10 or 100-fold. And that's the lack of imagination and innovation. So when we start working on these projects to develop the maritime domain of a state, we're looking not just at how we quantify the raw economic value of the maritime space, and we always appreciate the input from all the different maritime economic actors, be it shipping and ports or fisheries and coastal tourism or underwater marine heritage like wrecks that provide all kinds of other possibilities. But we are also looking at how you enhance the value, how you add value. And how do you take a local fish that's worth $10 and turn it into a fish that on the international market gets $20 because of its particular branding, its traceability, its transparency, its sustainability, and how do we, in a responsible way, increase the economic value of the maritime domain? So we are always looking for companies that are innovating in that space, be it through technology or through creative schemes that are in line with international best practices and sustainability. And so that's who we would love to be able to interact with, because there are opportunities. And once you navigate some of the traditional hindrances and barriers to doing business, the opportunities are truly immense.
Wow. Fantastic. Look, Ian, as always, fascinating listening to you. Thank you for sharing some of your insights and your thoughts. Before we end, were you able to think of a quote or saying that you want?
Yeah. I'll share a quote.
Please.
So one of the things I love about working in Africa is that well, the thing I love most is the people, and that's I have come to know and just connect with some of the most amazing people I've met my entire life. I consider them family at this point. Some of them have stayed in my house, I've stayed in theirs, and the closeness is really remarkable. And so I'll quote one of my dear friends. He is an admiral in the Ivorian Navy, and he is the acting director of the Regional Maritime Security Center. But he's always a fountain of wisdom, and the proverbs that come out of Africa are so insightful and instructive. And this one isn't necessarily about business per se, but it goes to the sorts of sort of depth of thinking that I so appreciate. And he often repeats this when we talk about how the government architecture functions or not. And he says, you can't blame your house for letting the rain come in until you put a roof on it. In other words,
Wow.
don't get pissed off about bad things happening if you haven't done what you need to do to stop them. And until your house is built, until your architecture is in place, until everything is actually squared away, yeah, things are going to happen. But don't blame your you know
Wow.
your house or even the bad things. Is you who needs to get going and get everything in order. So
Fantastic.
that sort of wisdom I so appreciate.
Right. Wow, that's fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, so, I think that I actually really think that you are a perfect example of how valuable the Empower Africa business community can be. Because many times what businesses and projects are missing, as you know very well, are to connect the dots. And I think
Exactly.
that specifically you, with all your experience, first of all, connect a lot of dots, and you're also kind of, you're in deep in many different aspects. In addition to your other vast experience, which we didn't have time this session to go into in depth, but I'm already telling you that we're going to have another session soon, because I'd love to really just hear more about different things that you're working on. And like I said, we probably need at least 3 hours to do it properly. But yeah, I really think that the concept of finding the right experts who can
Mm,
come and this is someone that has been there and 80 other countries,
exactly.
but has been there, knows what the deal is, has all the data and the information and experience, but also, went to Cambridge, the original Cambridge, and has, this is the company, this is the track record, right? The concept of the trusted business community
Yeah.
and the concept of, and I really see you as one of those connectors, not just between people, but also connecting the dots on a lot of this information. Yeah, I look forward to continue looking to do things together with Empower Africa and the rest of the Empower Africa business community. Which, by the way, reminds me that we need to hop on a call, an interesting project that I need to speak with you about.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much for joining us. And is
My
there
pleasure.
anything else that you wanna end with? Just
I'll end with actually one other quote. It's the Mark Twain quip: "When your only tool is the hammer, every problem looks like a nail." One of the problems that you're sort of speaking to there is that often we go into a new setting with our past experiences and expect the new setting to look familiar. Another great quote is Africa is not a country. The diversity across the continent, around the continent, is immense. And even if you have been very successful in one country, it doesn't mean you will have any success in the neighbor if you do not approach it with the same open mind and agility and willingness to adapt that you did in the first place. And so, we have to make sure that we do not become cookie cutter in our approach within Africa. And I think that's where having the relationships with Africans is the critical element. You cannot be, we're a couple of white guys. We can't solve Africa's problems. We're not African, and
yeah,
we have to have that connection. We have to have that relationship. It has to be honest. It has to be genuine. The more that we can genuinely collaborate, the more that everybody can benefit together.
100% and amen for that. And once you said that, I one of the first things that I mention to people when we talk about Africa, and usually I'm mentioning this to those who are a little bit less aware, right? Um, I mention the concept of enhancing more positive awareness. And I say, what do I mean? So many friends of mine from New York, Tel Aviv, the Valley, DC, London, they view Africa, and by the way, many of them intelligent, beautiful, successful people, right? They still view
Hmm.
Africa as a country
Yeah.
instead of a continent with 54 countries. So that's
Yeah.
kind of, really just one of the biggest things that we see ourselves like another mission of ours, is to really, understand the potential, understand the numbers, get an idea of the stats because it's just, remarkable. So Ian, thank you so much for your time. Wonderful seeing you. And
Likewise, my
thank you for all
pleasure.
your insights. And we'll talk soon.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Stay safe and healthy.
You too.
All right.